There's always so much pressure to go last at a conference like this. Everybody's anxious to go home. But it's a pleasure and it's an honor for me to be here today. Um, I am the patient advocate formerly known as Veronica Seneriz. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize the symbol or anything. I'm not like Prince, but earlier this year, I was at a LE&RN event in Austin where Kim and Bill were at, and it was in Lymphatic Forum 2019. And after the meeting and the presentation, a researcher approached me and he said, "Do you know where I can find Veronica Seneriz?" And I said, "I'm Veronica Seneriz. How can I help you?" And he said, "Oh, I was looking for a man, but you're very much a woman." And I said, "Oh, okay." So from now on, as a rule of thumb, I'm going by Veronica. But with all that aside, I'm from Houston, Texas. I flew in yesterday. I wear a lot of hats in the lymphatic community. One of them, as of this year, is, for full disclosure, I am a Jobst USA ambassador. I am the chair of the LE&RN Texas chapter. I think I gave my first patient story in Plano, Texas in 2016. And for me, that was very emotional because my father had passed away that year. And I'll get into that in a few minutes, but it was the first time where I was in a setting just like this, surrounded by people with lymphedema that were not related to me. And it was just so empowering. So what I like to do is I like audience participation, so bear with me. I like to do a roll call. And then I had some questions before, and Kathy kind of asked some questions, and Cam did. So you answered some of them for me. I was going to ask I wanted to find who was the person who had lymphedema the longest in this room. And I believe it's this individual. I was going to call out different decades, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 60 years. So you were diagnosed in the 1950s. So the purpose of this, part of what my talk is going to cover is the past, the present, and the future from my perspective and some of my partners on where lymphedema activism and communication and involvement, and where you as a patient can get involved. So, as I alluded to before, my father had lymphedema too. He lived for 43 years with lymphedema and unilaterally. I was born in 1974, and some of my earliest memories were of my father during very, very scary cellulitis episodes. They were so frequent that my mother always had a hospital go bag packed with toiletries and pajamas, because we never knew at what time of day or what would prompt it. But oftentimes we were roused at 2 a.m. in the morning, and we were speeding to the hospital because my father had 104 fever, and he would be shaking violently. I don't know as a roll call, who here has experienced cellulitis? Who here has experienced cellulitis to the point of sepsis? How many times have you endured that? If you've endured it more than once. So 2 people out of this entire room would fall into the category of my father. It's very traumatic. And one of the things that I want to touch upon, even though the theme of this conference is the fact that it's all about you, you includes your spouse, your husband, your wife, your children, your friends, your neighbors, everybody around you is impacted. Your coworkers, when you call in sick, that you're hospitalized yet again. And some of them are understanding and some of them are not. They may think that because you look a certain way, that maybe you're faking it or you're looking for attention. You're an attention seeker. So there's a lot of psychosocial stuff involved, but my father passed away in June of 2016 after enduring over 100 bouts of cellulitis. And on at least 3 occasions, he was septic and in the hospital, in the ICU, for several days. I'm convinced to this day, after everything that I've learned in the last few years, that the only thing that prolonged his life as long as it did was this garment. Okay. This garment. My father wore Jobst for over 40 years, every single day. And I have learned that when you wear your compression every single day, just like all of the experts have told you, I can tell you from real life testimony, he would have either passed away or endured even more infections had he not worn his garment. When you wear your garment, you reduce your likelihood for infection by as much as 66%. So when people ask me about compression, I say, I wear compression to save my life. Okay. It's very, very important that everyone in this room have that takeaway, at least for me. I want you to carry that message onward. I know we make jokes and we might say, oh, I was in a fight, or I was bit by a shark, or something like that, but when you downplay it, then you do a disservice to the community, because then we turn around and we want the LTA to pass, and we want the NIH to add more funding, and we want more money for research, but they don't understand why. And the one thing that people understand is death, infection, complications, unemployment, anxiety, depression, all of that is associated with this disease needs to be carried forward. So moving on. Good with this. Wait, sorry. Okay, so not only did my dad have it, my entire paternal, well, not my entire, but a lot of the paternal side of my family has lymphedema. So my grandfather was born with congenital lymphedema, or it was present very early in his boyhood in 1905. The next person was my uncle, who is still living today, but he has early onset Alzheimer's, so I can't really get a lot of detail from him. He's had a heart transplant, and that's going to be relevant in the next slide. Of course, my dad. I have a cousin in West Texas. My grandfather and me, even within 6 members of the same family, I have lower extremity bilateral, and he had lower extremity bilateral. But all the other ones were different sides. Some were left leg, some were right leg. So I make that distinction because a lot of times when I talk to people, they'll say, well, why can't you just tell me what to do? We all have different presentations. Even within the same family, we can't talk to each other. I can't talk to my cousins about what it's like to have bilateral because they only have it in one leg. They don't have to wear garments on both legs. So I think that's very important. Multi-generational primary lymphedema does exist. Um, it's scary because when pregnancy should be a very happy thing, and when you don't know if you're going to pass on something to your child, it can be very disconcerting. But we've thrived and we've moved on. So I was invited by Kathy Bates to attend the taping of the Dr. Phil show. So I was very, very fortunate enough to be invited as part of being a LE&RN advocate, and that trip was twofold. And this is the first time that I'm sharing this private site. My cousin, one of my cousins lives in California, Southern California. And she said, well, since you're flying out here, why don't we meet up? And she wanted to ask me some questions about lymphedema, and I said, sure. So we met up, and she took me to dinner, and I was very, very sick. I almost canceled the trip, but I went anyway. And she tells me about her daughter, Amy. And we're talking about lymphedema and what are the markers and how I found out all of this information. And she tells me Amy has the double row of eyelashes. And she started to cry. She said, Veronica, how do I stop this from happening to her? And why is this happening now? And I said, well, I can't explain why, but I can help you stop it from progressing. You know, we talked about compression, we talked about the do's and don'ts, we talked about everything that's happening here and talked about here. But I don't know if the fourth generation will present. And what is lymphedema disguised syndrome? A couple of speakers touched on it today, but we're going to deep dive a little bit. Basically, the biggest marker is a double row of eyelashes. If you are a medical professional in this room and you have a patient that comes into your office, Dr. Eric Mouse down in Texas diagnosed me for the first time in 2016. I walked into his office and he pulls out this jewelry. It looked like a jewelry loop. And, you know, I'm looking at my rings, and I just met the guy, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in the wrong place. And I said, I don't have lymphedema of the face. Why are you pulling out this lip? And he goes, well, I'm going to look at your eyes. I said, I don't have them. He said, just bear with me. So he looks in my eyes, and he goes, oh yeah, you have it. You have FOXC2 genetic mutation, blah, 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 blah. And I said, what? My entire life, every time I had ever gone to get my eyes checked, the ophthalmologist had always said, do you know how rare you are? You have a double row of eyelashes. You have to wear contacts to protect your corneas. So in 2016, I find out that my eyes and my legs are connected. No one had ever told me that before. So I touch on that every time I speak at a conference because there's so many medical professionals in this room. All of you, I know all of you go get your eyes checked. You know, I educated my eye doctor. He thought it was very interesting, and he said that he was going to do it as a method of practice, but, you know, it's really amazing how two things that are seemingly unconnected can be a direct result of each other. So, how did I find out I had lymphedema? I was driving down the freeway in Houston. I just graduated from college at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and I saw that sign on the freeway going to my first job out of college. And I don't know if you can really see that very carefully. But this part, complete decongestive therapy, lymphedema prevention. Does that look any different from what you heard today? No, right? This document was printed in 1998, and here we are in 2019. And that's kind of a double edge. We have so much going right now. I want you to know how far we've come in terms of microsurgery, thanks to people like Dr. Dhruv Singhal and Tim Padera. You know, how far we've come in technology in terms of the compression garments. This is not the sock my father wore. Okay, as much as we complain about how hot they are and washing them and donning them, this technology was not available back then. So as a result, more people suffered complications. So, I just cannot stress that enough, how important it is to recognize the past. Thank you.